So let's maybe some of the questions I'm going to ask might be simple questions or kind of easy questions because we're trying to work into this, and there's some issues that I think you guys, I have thought about, spent a lot of time thinking about that perhaps not everyone has spent a lot of time thinking about. So some questions might be simple in that sense, but remember it's a discussion that we want to expose to people who are perhaps new to this. Just tell me about the experience of being a coconut and what that means, Tulani.
Yeah, I mean, I think at the core of it is that you exist in at least two worlds, probably three. So you exist in one world where the white people exist, you exist in one world where the black people exist, and the third world where you actually exist. And that's you and your fellow coconuts, I suppose. And you get to vent about both the black and the white people because you don't understand either side. I think what it does is also at times make you feel lost, I think, just not belonging. So it adds another layer to identity, which does not necessarily help. I think the worst thing about it, though, is that you discover that quite late in your life. So I think Lindiwe kind of pointed to it somewhat. For the longest time, well, it would have been similar. I went to a black school for the first 5 years of my life, and I was comfortably black and good there. Then I went into a white school for a while. It took me a year or two, but eventually I thought I was comfortably white and comfortable. And then one day someone was like, no, you're not white. And someone was like, no, you're not black. And then suddenly I had to discover what I am. And I became a coconut somehow. Unfortunately, I don't think it actually captures the truth of what it is to be a coconut. I'm not black on the outside and white on the inside. I'm just different from both groups.
Thanks. If you have anything to add to that, jump in. Lindiwe, you hinted at, I think, the importance of education and exposure. What did the exposure you had, what did that do for you in a way which it might not have done for perhaps a cousin or your folks, in how you came to a view about what this country is all about? Just talk about exposure and maybe give us one or two stories inside that.
First of all, education is, I think, the most important tool that each and every human being can have, because it broadens your perspective of things. It makes you understand the big picture. And I think that's what's missing when you look at unprivileged people who are predominantly black in South Africa. They don't have that tool to help them see the big picture. I'll give you a classic example. I'm wholly frustrated by the fact that mine workers don't understand that unions don't work. I think we all in this auditorium share that notion, but unfortunately the masses don't see it that way. Why? It's because of the lack of understanding the simple fundamentals. So they'll take whatever it is that someone else would say, and without having any form of resource of researching what they say and so forth. So I think in order for us to move forward as a country, we need to sharpen education.
But doesn't that also work the other way around? You've talked about how black people don't have exposure, but I would imagine that a lot of white people don't have exposure as well. So, for example, back to the mines, I'll put my hand up. I've never been to a mine in any useful way in South Africa. I've never been exposed to what it means to spend 10 hours working underground in 40-degree temperatures. I don't know what a mining hostel looks like or what it's like to live there, but I'm sure it sucks. So there's also non-exposure on the white side, isn't there?
It's true, but it depends on the levels of education. So, for instance, if we take around about 8% of the South African population doesn't have a standard 5. which is a grade 7, and you take, this is a black population, and obviously the picture looks very different on the white side of things. So that simple primary, but I'm looking for the word basic education that white people would have, puts them in a much more better advantage than the black counterpart. So yes, there are uneducated white people, but compared to the masses, which is the black people, the picture is different.
Let me push on that. Johnny, you want to add to that?
We're allowed to add.
Yeah.
I want to push on that, and I want to ask both of you. I was actually going to come directly to Lukhanyo.
I know for a fact that Lukhanyo has a very different view to Lindy on that, and I can't wait to hear what he's going to say now. I think the key thing for me is that when you have essentially the economic tools, and by that I genuinely mean money and ability to get access to things that are the exposure or lack of exposure is by choice. So people don't go to townships because they choose not to go to townships. But the kind of exposure, the kind of lack of resource that a mine worker would have in terms of being able to research what is actually feasible and viable in terms of an increase for a mine is not by choice. It's just something that they're just not able to do. And for me, it's worse to not choose to go and see what the rest of the country looks like and see how you can contribute to making a difference, as opposed to someone who is almost not exposed out of genuine ignorance.
Okay. Yes. Same. If you want to make any point about that.
Maybe I'll start with telegraphically. Can I say one, I'm not a coconut. And I am 5 years younger than Tulani. From crash, I've only been around white people. And I don't prescribe to the coconut. I think it's a particularly problematic term. We can have a conversation about that another day. But I don't call myself a coconut. And I also disagree vehemently that unions don't work, right? and today, and that's not the point of today. So I'm not going to answer in depth. I'm simply going to say I disagree. Without the unions, black workers would continue to be exploited, even more so than they've already been exploited by white corporates. No, your question.
Okay, so let me ask something about what you said. You said that something about whiteness being the normal mode of humanity. Just expand on that a little bit.
Sure. That this entire discussion is having to happen in English. That when I walked in at the door, I had to leave my blackness at the door.
What does that mean?
That the things I would do when I'm around black people, the way I'd respond to situations, the way I'd speak, the way I'd act, the way I'd respond, I had to leave all those at the door. The sad reality of our society is that whiteness is good, blackness is bad. And we are taught, and in the education thing, the issue is not, so what bishops taught me in a private school that my parents were able to send me to, what it taught me was not mathematics. It didn't teach me science, no. It taught me how to act in white spaces. How to act and be accepted in white spaces. All what I learned at bishops was how to make sure that you see me and treat me well. That's what it taught me. So every day I remind myself, I'm around this group of people now, and in order for them to recognize who I am, I need to act this way. And in a long-winded way, that's what I mean by whiteness is the norm. And I quoted Fanon earlier on. Fanon says that black people aren't even othered. It's nice being othered. Being the other is nice. Being a non-being is completely different. And I say this because of, and I didn't want to go this route, but I'll say it because of the lived reality of every day when I walk into the places I work and the coffee shops I work at, I constantly feel that there's a shift where when I walk into the room, there's a shift because no one can see that I went to Bishop's. No one can tell that the state of my bank account. No one can tell my accent. No one can see any of it. All they see is this black object. And that's what I mean by whiteness is the norm, and that whiteness doesn't have to jump through the hurdle of having to earn humanity at every step.
So this is the structural racism thing that you were talking about, I think, right?
Yes.
That there is you bring your black face into the white space. That black face in the white space means certain things automatically. And then you have to to demonstrate or disprove all of the tags that are coming along with that. Is that what you're talking about? That part of what you're...
Yeah, it's part of what I'm talking about. I suppose I also don't want to be overly reductionist and simply limit it to the economics of it. And the only reason I don't want to, there's a prevailing narrative at the moment that says all that we need to fix at the moment is economic freedom. It's not going to help us.
Let me take this deeper and push, and I'm maybe still talking to you, but listen in. It sounds to me that there's a sense in which you guys, the ones I'm listening to now, are also having to deal with something that affects you and has hurt you and has wounded you yourself in your time and in your in your lifetime. And how are you working through that? So, when I think about the recognitions of my own life, that my own language is something that I've not seen as worthwhile or valuable. I'm now recognizing that, this is a part of the structure that I live in that has never given me a sense of valuing this. And I'm having to recover, in some ways repent, and try and move in that direction. What are the kinds of things where you're seeing the hurt, and maybe I think the hurt is the right word, in your own lives? And
I actually have an awesome physical example of blackness being tested. So when I've told you this before, but when I went to Messina, or Law School of Messina, as I'm sure Mr. James would want me to call it, for the first time, it was 95. So it's 1994, just had the democratic dispensation, and in the new year of the 95, I go into a white school, and there are 4 black boys and there are 6 black girls in a school of about 750 kids. Okay. We also happen to be concentrated in one class for whatever reason. Most of us, for reasons I can't remember, whatever, chance, whatever it was. But at that time, we were literally tested physically by studying literally from the youngest up till, I think from January up to September that year. The 4 black boys were involved in at least one fight a day until September, when one of us finally kicked the stunned five's backside. Where you literally, everyone just wants to see, are you strong enough to beat me up? Are you this, are you that? Luckily, between the 4 of us, one of us was academically dominant and dominated the entire class. One of us was athletically dominant, dominated almost the whole school. One was socially phenomenal, and so on. So as a combination, we made one phenomenal person. And that's probably by the grace of God, but we almost had to prove ourselves as not being viewed as good enough, and it completely had to do with the fact that we were not white at the time. But I think it's pervasive to the point where even in corporate South Africa today, to get a shot at being big, you need to show that you can handle the space in a manner that's not offensive to the white guys who are in charge. And that usually means being a bishop's kid or speaking English to get away or whatever it is. And sometimes speaking Afrikaans, because in Old Mutual is beter om Afrikaans te praat.
Lindy.
You still black. Coconut. Anyway, let's get that one. I think I go through a hurt every day. More so now since I'm a parent of two young kids. And I take them to a white crash. So every time I drop them off in school, I almost break into tears because for them, their world is quite innocent, if I can put it that way. So a kid will never see race. It's only when you get out into the big blue sea that you shaped into a racist self. That's basically how it works in our society. So I'll look at what I thought would be thriving nations, such as the Scandinavian nations. That they're progressive, there's no racism there. But then when you hear people that have been to those countries, they will tell you the contrary, that you know what, racism exists everywhere. So I think that hurts me more than anything, that there's just no escape. Whether you go to a township, you see racism. Whether you go to a mall in Pretoria, which has got a lot of malls, you see racism. So it's really unfortunate that we bring up kids in such a society.
It's interesting because I was having this conversation the other day with a friend, and the reason I said no to speaking to them was because the very act of speaking here requires a certain level of vulnerability and opening myself up to psychological violence. And what I do now is I practice self-care. I avoid spaces where I feel I'm going to be violated psychologically. That's the one thing. The second thing for me that's becoming increasingly important, and Os Guinness in his book, A Free People Suicide, has a brilliant quotation. He says, I forget the quote now, but I'll tell you what, paraphrase speaks of how the issue is not the wolf at the door, but rather the termite in the floor. The issue is not the wolf at the door, but rather the termites in the floor. And one of the ways I'm beginning to handle anti-black racism better, beyond just simply acknowledging my hurt. So the tone I delivered my talk in today, the way I wrote it was very deliberate. I did not want to hide the feelings and thoughts I have. That's one. The second thing about it is me also being less concerned with, and I'll put this bluntly, and please catch it correctly, being less concerned with white people. And a lot of the time we spend as black people far too much time trying to, white people kill us better, white people kill us better, white people kill us better, and we forget the real wounds and issues created by anti-black racism over all the centuries. And I think what's becoming important for me, and before it could also simply be a reason.
So you're not anti-black racism as in from whites or from other white people?
Oh no, from white people.
Okay.
There's another conversation about become racist. It's a different conversation. So what I'm beginning to spend a lot more time on now is healing, doing the work of healing. How do I spend more time amongst black people? Say, black people, there is serious levels of inferiority complexes that we've inherited that are forced on us to consider every single day. There's hurt that you experience every single day. How do you handle these termites? The wolf at the door, and you see, when I say what will each other's mirrors, the wolf at the door must go back to its pack and handle itself. And so I'm beginning to shift my focus from handling the wolf. And this is probably the last time I'm going to speak the way I have at a situation, at an occasion like this, because I think it's not entirely helpful. Rain calls more bad. I'm going to walk away from this today. I'm going to even though I could take it off as good, but there's hurt that comes along with having to speak about this for such a long period of time. And my role now is to focus on the role of healing, not just the individual, but the collective. And maybe I should say this in my final thing. The reason I do say I speak about black people is that unlike in Western societies, where society is over-individualized, in black society, we speak about and of the collective. That there's a collective experience and that we don't over-individualize things. And that's one of the reasons I refuse to speak about personal experience, because there's a collective experience, a collective hurt, there's a collective request for justice, there's a collective request for reconciliation that is necessary. And I think it's the over-individualization of our pain and hurt that's meant that we haven't yet dealt with issues. Because what we then do is that if I'm reconciled with one white person, I'm happy. The issue is not me being reconciled with one white person, but rather if we're able to deal and deal with the collective, because that's where the problem is, not the individual. It's easy for me to accept it as an individual, but it's harder for all of us to accept it. And that's why,
Yeah, I was so we're kind of getting short on time, so there's a couple of questions that I really think I need to get in there. I think it was you, Lucanio, who talked about intentions, and I think you were hinting at intentions of white people don't really matter. And if I can take that a little bit further with my words, not yours, the intentions don't matter because the structure of the system determines the results, determines the way the intention is framed, determines what happens, determines who's got the power. Is that correct? And just maybe say a bit about that in Tulani as well.
Yes and no. Yes, in the sense that the intentions don't matter. No, in the sense that the structure does not maintain itself. So it's nice to say that all white people are good, and that is only the structure that's at play, but the structure does not sustain itself. It's perpetuated by people. So when I say yes and no, both of these things are at play, because they're unbinding opposites.
So can you be a good person and a racist at the same time?
I think the nature of sin allows us to.
Yes. Can you be a good person? Yeah, I think you're right about the nature of sin allows.
Yeah, you kind of sabotage my thinking. So give me the last bit again.
So I was saying that the intentions, do intentions matter in the context of a structure that actually kind of mediates and communicates the let me give you a quick example. White friends of ours, we heard them talking to us about this on Saturday, had an incident where at a garage someone cut in front of them and just did something that was just not cool and quite rude, because they cut in front of them and ended up getting served before them. They came out of the car and said, "Look, what are you doing?" Guy, happened to be black, said, "You're not my boss." Their intention was to speak to a rude person who did ABC. It looks like there was a structural thing which happened, and that person's response was a response to a structure, not to that. So
sure. Yeah, look, and I think that to say that intentions don't matter is unfair. But I do think that intentions are not enough. I think that intentions must be cognizant of the structure. I think that it is the responsible thing to do is to say, for example, if I come to you, so white person X comes to my house and brings me back because they think I'm hungry. And the intention is to give hungry. I can be like, what racist nonsense is this? You think all black people eat blah, 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 because of my own things. Now, the intentions can't be ignored because they were good. They were trying to feed me. But my reaction can be seen in a context of a structure where maybe the thing to do was to come and say, Tulani, are you hungry? And if you are hungry, what do you eat? So I
relationship.
Yeah, but again, and that's where I was driving at, all of that stuff requires the relationship to be able to know what the right things to do are, even in the space where there is a structure that's fighting against those things. Yeah.
I'm gonna squeeze one last question in before the white people's representative comes up to take over. Something that we must acknowledge, and we're doing this for the first time. There will be hopefully other opportunities to do this. There's a lot of testosterone up here, and we actually did have a female speaker who pulled out fairly late in the day. What does this walk as black men in this country, and your experience of black women, mothers, sisters, wives, etc. Just give me some reflections on your understanding of the black woman's struggle in South Africa, given this, because let's be frank, we only have half the battle. We're men, in a patriarchal society. It's doubly hard or triply hard for our mothers, wives, sisters.
I'll start with the mic.
And this is just a taste. They're not speaking for the room.
No, not speaking for the room, but my opinion of view. Look, I'm raised by a mother who's flatly racist. She doesn't care for white people. She's not interested in white people. And as far as she's concerned, white people must go chill somewhere and preferably never come out. And I don't say that lightly. I say that because it speaks of very deep hurt. It's the hurt that she has experienced throughout her lifetime has made her to choose to not even see individuals within the white group because the pain has come through across that space. I think that, for example, I've always argued that I think Xhosa women are harsh. But they are harsh because their men were systematically pulled out of their communities and they had to play the role of men and be strong and be harsh and be all kinds of things that in an ideal world they wouldn't have had to play. So I think if there's any pain associated with being a black male, that pain is probably at least double in terms of being a black South African woman. Having to raise the children of another woman in another location while you have no idea what's happening to your own children being domestic. Having to sink to the level of carrying the leftovers from another woman's house to feed your own children because you just don't have enough to cover the children. The pain for women must be of proportions one can't possibly understand with black men, never mind a white person. And I think what's been missing the voice that's been very clearly missing from 94 has been that of the black woman. And I think Winnie Mandela gives us a clear picture of that. She's been played out to be the devil while her husband is played out to be the best gift to mankind. And all because she was doing what she needed to do to survive, never mind actually thrive and be someone who lives up to 75. There's a voice that's missing, and I'm almost crying, but there's something there. Yeah.
Very shocking and very long-winded noted. I'm not going to speak on behalf of black women, I don't know, except to say that they live in a very patriarchal society where we men act out levels of oppression against them. Where we exclude them daily in our practices. And I think I'm generous when I say 99.9% of spaces in society now are largely patriarchal and exclude women. When we then add that to the kind of racism we're speaking of, you complete that equation. Sure.
tough one. I think both the speakers have captured my sentiment. They could not have said it better. I think in general it's quite tough to be in South Africa. As they've said that we're living in a highly patriarchal society. It's even much more tougher for black women, even nowadays. However, I think we need to look at the positives more than the negatives, where we come from in the society. Since 1994, I think in general we've made quite good strides. Women are recognized as people first, and black women are not recognized only as servants of black men, but they have a voice, which is quite important. I grew up, I'll share my life story. My father was quite a tribal man. He believed in fixing up a woman. And I actually lived to see that reality. And my mom was quite strong to actually deal with it. And also she was living two worlds. One is she was marginalized in the workplace because she was a nurse. And then two, she was marginalized in a safe haven, which was home. So it was quite tough. So to have seen the change from that particular norm to what we have now is quite phenomenal. So I think even with the floor being given an opportunity to ask questions, I think in our minds we should be thinking about providing solutions. We can talk until the cows come home about our experiences, how we're affected by racism and so forth and so forth. But then I think we're asking the wrong questions. The right question is, how do we fix it? It's broken, yes. Just to finish off. It's broken, and I'm an engineer, so I believe that there's always a solution.
Gentlemen, thank you. The last question, which I'm not going to put to you, but I think something you need to bear in mind, and perhaps as rounding off is, we're here, many of us are part of the Christian community, and to your point, Lindizwe, about what do we do? What are the new, novel, perhaps imaginative, maybe they're old things that we just need to do, things that we need to start doing, or ways that we need to start thinking or stop thinking in order that we can actually do things effectively. So just bear that in mind for, I think, this Q&A as well as for the end.
Thank you, Itai. Let's give Itai a round of applause, thanks.